The main character, named Doc, surrounded by a group of onlookers, and the state governor, Richard Jebs, awaits the commencement of the execution procedure. The accused, Miguel Prada, has been convicted of a triple murder. In his final statement, he tells those present that his victim screamed like pigs, and that this is only the beginning. Before his death, Miguel prays and asks for his pain to be eased. The next day, while sitting in a cafe, Doc meets with his boss, Billy, who is also Richard's right-hand woman. After discussing work matters, they notice their boss on the television. Richard addresses Mr. Prada, whose brother was executed that night, stating that this is merely the first step in his fight for a drug-free country, and that the next target will be the cartel leader himself. Hearing this, Doc, clearly annoyed, remarks that it's time for that idiot to shut up, as threatening the head of a damn cartel could end badly for all of them. Doc asks her to talk to Richard, but she responds that it's utterly pointless and that he would sell his own mother for a seat in Washington. She explains that it's precisely for that seat that he has initiated this entire drug war. Along with Doc, these statements are also seen by Mr. Prada, the younger brother, who declares that Miguel must be avenged. Prada responds that Miguel always acted recklessly, and such an end was simply a matter of time for him. However, Cuca doesn't relent and insists that the statements made by that suit on television are a direct insult to them. He argues that their father would never have allowed such disrespect toward himself. Prada tries to reason with his impulsive brother, explaining that this is America, where playing to the audience is common, and urges him not to take everything to heart. Later, Doc meets his daughter and takes her to a cafe, where they discuss his divorce from her mother. Doc reassures her that he has hired a good lawyer, and soon they won't have to meet in secret anymore. After a good night's sleep, Doc jumps into a luxurious car and heads to work. He works as a mediator between the city authorities and the drug cartel. This place is so serious that female employees are forbidden to wear clothes so they don't steal anything. When he meets a cartel representative, Doc expresses his regret about what happened to Miguel. The representative, after a moment of contemplation, replies that he regrets it too and then walks away. Arriving at a charity event, Doc encounters Billy. She asks how the cartel reacted to Richard's statement. Doc responds that they reacted in the worst possible way, by not reacting at all. This unnerves him slightly. He urges her to convince Richard to stop making his idiotic speeches on television, but she says it's impossible because he doesn't know all the details of their business with Doc. Finding Richard's assistant, Clark, in the restroom, Doc demands that he bring Richard to him. Clark retorts that Doc should come to their office tomorrow, and they might check their schedule to see if they can spare some time for him. Grabbing the guy by the balls, Doc threatens that Clark had better bring Richard immediately, or he'll be switching careers from politics to opera singing. Meeting with Richard, Billy tells him to cut the crap with his war on drugs because they could end up in serious trouble because of him. Richard asks what she means, and what his connection to the cartel could possibly be. Billy counters by asking him where he thinks all those donations to his campaign came from, and why he enjoyed such wild popularity among the Mexican population. Pondering this, Richard asks what deal she made. She explains that in exchange for financial support, they promised Mr. Prada to overlook certain enterprises of his. And while Mr. Prada might have been able to overlook the killing of his unhinged brother, he will retaliate with full force against any attempts to dismantle his empire. As Doc is about to leave, Richie runs up to him and says he hasn't forgotten what Doc did for him during the war and will always be grateful. Doc, responding to this sudden display of sentimentality, tells Richie to stop acting like an idiot and to at least think about his family, because Prada is not someone to mess with. The next day, waking up with a terrible hangover, Doc discusses the upcoming custody hearing with his wife. He then heads to Billy's house. Suspecting something amiss, Doc circles around the house to the backyard and climbs to the second floor, where he finds Billy and her girlfriend lying with gunshot wounds to their heads. He calls Clark and urgently demands to speak with Richard. Clark responds that whatever agreement they had with the cartel is off and asks Doc not to call him again. Heading to a warehouse, Doc meets with Cuca, who silently observes from a distance. Grabbing a pack of money, Doc is about to leave when he notices a group of SWAT officers. Fighting his way to the exit, he takes down one of the cartel members and steals his car. Meanwhile, Cuca leisurely strolls through the warehouse, killing anyone who crosses his path. That same evening, Richie, feeling triumphant, lays out a heap of drugs and stacks of money on a table as he prepares for a press conference where he plans to announce that the first phase of his war on drugs has been a success. A detective approaches Richie and informs him that witnesses saw his head of security, a certain Alex Doc, leaving the warehouse shortly after the raid began. Feigning surprise, Richie claims he has no idea what Doc was doing there. However, if Doc is somehow connected to the cartel, he insists that Doc must be found and killed because he is incredibly dangerous. After the detectives leave, Clark runs up to Richie and asks if he knows that Billy is dead. Richie calmly replies that of course he knows, it was his order. Surprised, Clark listens as Richie explains that his seat in Washington is almost secured, and he can't afford for anyone to find out about his ties to the cartel. Clark gets into his car and is startled to find Cuca sitting in the back seat. Cuca orders him to put his hands behind his head and then ties them with a zip tie. He demands to know where Richie's boss is. Terrified, Clark reveals that his boss is hiding in a fortified compound with his family and never leaves without security. After divulging everything he knows, Clark begs for his life. Cuca asks if he's a believer, then tells him he'll have a few minutes to settle matters with God. Stepping out of the car, Cuca lights a cigarette, takes a drag, and flicks it into the gas tank, setting the vehicle ablaze. The next day, Doc's phone rings. Answering it, he hears Cuca's voice, telling him that he is Doc's daughter. Cuca demands that Doc bring him Richie's head by tomorrow evening, or he'll take his daughter's head instead. Furious, Doc goes to see Seth, the one who initially brokered their deal with the cartel. Seth reveals that Cuca is a maniac who has killed more people in his short life than the entire U.S. Army. Seth insists that if Cuca has Doc's daughter, there is no saving her. Distressed, Doc kills Seth. Arming himself to the teeth, Doc heads to Richie's mansion. After taking out the guards, he enters Richie's room. Seeing Richie's lover, he shoots her in the stomach, then finds his former friend in the bathroom. They reminisce about old times and their last friendly dinner together. Richie expresses his regret, to which Doc responds that he is sorry too before shooting Richie in the head. Using a chainsaw, Doc saws off Richie's head, places it in a bag, and calls Cuca to arrange the meeting. With Richie's head in tow, Doc heads to the designated location. Meanwhile, Cuca goes to a gay bar and picks up a prostitute. After having sex, he steps outside for a smoke. During this time, the sex worker decides to powder her nose and enters the restroom, where she discovers a girl handcuffed to a pipe. Realizing she shouldn't have seen this, Cuca knocks her to the ground and beats her to death. He then drags the body outside and dumps it in a trash bin. The girl asks why he killed her. Cuca calmly explains that she went where she wasn't supposed to go. She then asks if he enjoys killing. Cuca replies that he doesn't, but in this harsh world, killing is sometimes necessary. He recounts a story from his childhood about how one of the neighborhood boys insulted his mother, who was American. Cuca tracked him down, broke into his room, and stabbed him 40 times. Their conversation is interrupted by a commotion outside. Someone saw Cuca disposing of the body and called the police. Grabbing the girl, Cuca shoves her into the trunk of his car and then sets off to cover his tracks. Meanwhile, Doc drives to the meeting point, talking to Richie's severed head in the bag. He laments that Richie was a fool. He had everything: money, a good job, and a family. Richie could have become the president, but instead, he chose to meddle where he was warned not to, and now he's just a head in a bag. Upon seeing that his brother brought a girl, Prada loses his temper and tells Cuca that he's fed up with his antics. He questions what Cuca thinks the Americans will do to their business after the murder of a U.S. governor. Their argument is interrupted when Doc enters the room and hands Prada the bag containing Richie's head. Prada, glancing disapprovingly at the contents, expresses a measure of respect for Doc and mentions that Miguel always spoke highly of him. However, Prada states he cannot let them go because if these atrocities committed by his brother are linked back to him, it would spell the end of his business. After breaking free from captivity and killing Cuca along with the other cartel members, Doc makes his way to Prada's office. Holding Doc at gunpoint, Prada declares that he won't tolerate such disrespect in his own house. As Prada learns about his brother's death, he momentarily loses focus, giving Doc's daughter just enough time to shoot him in the head. Calming her down, Doc gets into the car with his daughter, and they drive back home.